Welcome to our evening session, 6 p.m., November the 24th. My name is Darryl Dunnington. I'm with DSD Incorporated or DSD Inc. I am the head of global learning or the director of global learning. So let's go ahead and hop into our lesson today, our lecture. Let's talk about what we looked at earlier this morning. We did take a look at the extended low code app studio extended. We went through all of the concepts there. There was only a few modules that you had to go through that were required. Complete that, take the mission test, and complete the mission exercise. If you need that lecture, again, you can go to your channel. That page is out there for you to take a look at. And also, you should have received a link, WebEx, that you can utilize and have access to. Some of you mentioned that you did get a certificate, so that's good. I'll just reiterate: store it away in a safe place, print it out, also, and it should appear in your Pega Academy profile as a badge. So you won't see the actual certificate, but you'll see that you have a badge that's there. If you have not submitted your results for BAE, please do those. I think you guys have. Let's see, 1, 2, yes. So I think all of you guys have submitted yours, so I do appreciate that going forward. These are the outstanding essays. Again, they must be completed. It is a prerequisite. It is a requirement for everyone in this program to complete all activities. It is as if you're working for someone. So these activities cannot go by the wayside, and they are required to be completed before you sit for the next exam, which is actually on December the 8th. I said December the 10th, but it is December the 8th. We don't have much time left. This evening, I will talk about data and integration essentials, that particular mission. I've already covered SAE Low Code Apps Builder and Extended and SAE Low Code Apps Builder. So you should be completing the mission and exercise and the test for all three of these. The goal is to have it completed by Friday. I also want you guys to know that Thursday we will not have our sessions. It is a holiday in the United States. We're celebrating Thanksgiving. So I don't know if you guys celebrate Thanksgiving, but we do here, and it's on the 27th. So we will not have class sessions on November the 27th. It is a holiday, and the expectation is you take that time to continue your work, complete the missions, exercises, and the mission test. Time zone stays the same, nothing there. We are focused on this system architect certification. You guys are tasked with completing the Low Code Apps Builder Extended, Data and Integration Essentials. That will get you 3 more digital badges. Those are required for you to pass this course. And in the end, you'll end up with 4 additional certificates from AWS that are based upon generative AI, an introduction to it, readying yourself if you're going to work with an organization that does AI, proper planning that's required, and just one of the particular products that utilize some of the generative AI features. All right, so that's all we have in our outline. So let's go ahead and get started. I am in Pega Academy. I am in the data and integration essentials. So if you want to follow me, please do that. I will bounce back and forth between that page and Dev Studio, our development environment. So feel free to open a development environment so you can follow me. I think it's a great way to learn, a great way to understand where you are and what you should be doing. So data, of course, from a Pega perspective, means anytime I am executing a case or even designing a case, the purpose for designing a case is to capture data, show data, manipulate data. If there's no reason for you to have access to data, then there's no reason for you to create a case. All right, so let's go ahead and look at all these that we skip. We come all the way down to the last 4 modules. Check that out, last 4 modules. There's only 4 modules that you need to cover. And the reason that they skip all of these others is because there is no true configuration implementation lecture associated with these. Creating, setting variables, manipulating application data. We've gone through all of that with the data transform. But the reason that in SAE that they focus on accessing a data source or accessing and sourcing data, that's the data page. That is a very technical rule type that is utilized for the gathering, manipulation, editing, deleting of data. So you have to know about it. So make sure that you spend a lot of time understanding what a data page is, how to configure that data page, how to implement that data page. Those are the types of questions that will be asked of you in the certification, and the skill that you need in order to be a effective developer for Pega solutions. There's no way of getting around it. You have to understand and know how to use a data page. If the 200 rules were people, the most popular rule of all of the data types would be a data page. It is utilized all the time. It is essential. It is required when we are accessing a data source so that we can make it available to the Pega application, or accessing an Pega application and making that source persistent into whatever external data source that it needs to be saved in. Typically, it is a database table, but it could be other things that it could be passed to. So let's take a look at these 4 modules. Remember, the 2 are challenges. It's 20 minutes, guys. It's 20 minutes of your time. Very simple challenges for you to do. The modules you probably do want to sit down and go through, but since I'm lecturing on them, make sure that you just use the podcast. The podcast will capture everything that I'm saying, translates it into Spanish for you. So that's a great learning artifact or asset for you to use going forward. All right, let's take a look at that. And it won't take me an hour and 15 minutes to go through all of this. Some of this you already know. So let's take a look at a data page. We'll cover 6 things here. Data page, the structure of that data page, the refresh strategy for that data page. In other words, how long do we want it to stay in cache? The data sources, where do we want to get it from? Page auto population, which says now that I have this data in memory and or in cache, how do you want me to populate it to the screen? And we'll see we have options to do that. How do we access data through a UI control? And what if we don't have the actual data source available? And I don't want to wait until it's done. how can I dummy up some data and make it available to my data page so I can do testing and continue my development cycle in Pega? Well, we'll talk about simulating external data sources. So let's look at a data page. Data page, there's a couple of sentences that are very important. They will give you good definition when we're talking about a data page. So it says here in this third line, a data page retrieves data from a data source and caches the data in memory. So if they ask you on the test, what does a data page do? It will retrieve data and it will cache data. It has those two capabilities, to retrieve data and to cache data for you. And it is considered separated from the business process. If you think about it, you look at the case life cycle and you have the processes and you have the steps, and you see how we're flowing automatically throughout the happy paths. And we're going down through the processes. We're executing the steps. But if you notice, none of those automations had anything to do with a data page. You could call a data transform, but not a data page. So a data page is separated out from the actual flow, but it is a proponent of a Pega application. And data pages are more associated with the data dash classes than with the workflow, which is associated with the work dash classes. So now we have work dash, we have data dash, where we're going to implement it through our data pages. And then within the data dash, we'll also have the int or integration, which is supported through the data page also. So we're going to focus on integration, int type classes, and data type classes in order for us to manage data sources and to cache them. Okay, and that separation is great because I can go through the flow and I can create those data sources and it's totally separate. One's not dependent upon the other. All right, so we call this on demand because we want to make sure that we want the data at a given time. As I'm going through the flow and maybe a UI comes up, and on that UI, someone clicks on a drop down. On that control of that drop down, we would have configured it that it will maybe auto-populate that field. So what happens when someone clicks, then all of a sudden, this data page, which is a declarative rule, when we talk about the declarative rule, we talk about a declarative network. A declarative rule within the declarative network listens for user actions. So the user action clicks on the drop down, it initiates the data page that's listening that says, oh, I need to execute my process so that I can go and retrieve the data and bring back that information in a certain structure. In this case, maybe a list. So it's a list. So now I see a list of all the information there. It's on demand. So now we call it on demand. And remember, I said the data page does two things. It can retrieve data. Now it retrieves and saves. We call those the same things. But it can also save it in cache. So what happens if I go to another field and then I want to come back to that field and I want to click on it and change it? Well, it doesn't make sense from a performance perspective for me to have to take another trip to the database and click to go back and retrieve the data again. So a data page is smart enough that if you configure it correctly, that it will look to see if the list is already in memory. If it's already in memory, then it'll use the information that's in memory, and it does not have to take a trip across the network to the data source, database, basically, to bring back the data. So that's what we talk about when we say on-demand access. They give you 4 simple steps for the process of utilizing a data page. A developer will, of course, create it. We'll talk about what type it will be. Is it editable, savable, read only? The structure, what type of structure do we want for the data? We want to bring back a single row of information, a list, multiple rows of information. We look at the source. Where's the source? How do we get access to the source? Do we call a service? Do we call a report definition? There are many ways that we can define that data page. But once it's defined and it's associated with our flow based off one of the actions, in most cases, the UI does something. Sometimes it is a back-end process that actually may call it. But the typical scenario, the UI, there's something on the UI, you do something, you have to click on it. It has to call a data page to retrieve some information for you. So the user, number 2, the user. The user attempts some action that requires the data page. As I mentioned before, maybe it's a drop-down menu where I need to populate that information, and it's dynamic because it's a list of 50 to 100 or more that's out in the database. And so it first checks to see if that information is in cache. Pega caches a lot of data. So you have to have a big system. Most of the time it's a cluster of machines that's running Pega. But it's caching the data. If the data is cached, and if the data is not stale, which means that it's been there too long and should have been refreshed. So if it's not stale, it is still fresh, then it will utilize the data. And that's also done again because a data page is a declarative rule. When you were creating a expression that would do an automatic calculation, that is considered a declarative expression. So that's a declarative rule. That's why when one of the input value changes, it automatically updates, for instance, the total. Data page is a declarative rule. So now it's listening. It realizes that it needs to go and fetch some data. And the first place that it looks is where? Is it in the cache? If it's fresh, it'll use it. If it's not in the cache, or if it is stale, if it has existed longer than when it should have been refreshed, then it will not use it. It will take a trip to the database itself, query the data, bring back that data, and load it into memory. And we can have our clipboard, as I mentioned before, is our tool where we can look at the memory. So all of that happens. Let me just go here. If I want to take a look at data pages, all I have to do is go to Dev Studio. In my Dev Studio, I have data types. So this is where I would go. And if I wanted to create new data types, I could create my new data types here. I can add a data type. This application has existing data types. So I go to the customer data type, and that customer data type is a data object. And you'll see things like the data model, all of the fields, the usage, who would be using it, the sources, what sources will utilize this data object. So you have these 3 data pages. One is a lookup, so you'd have to pass it keyed information for it to look up information, bring back one row of data. One is a list, so typically you'll use the database where clause, or Pega will build a query with a where clause that will bring back a set of data. That's the list. And then savable typically means that you're on a page, you've updated it, you verified this is what you want to be done with it, and you hit the save button. And so now that information is taken out of memory and saved into the database. Those are typically our three types of data pages. One to bring back a lookup, bring back one row, a list to bring back a set of data, multiple rows of data, and one, the third one is savable where we would want to save it. Now, within a data type or that data object, we have records, and the records will have data records. So data records, it's the information in a data type in Pega. We would say in a database that the rows of data, that's information in a database table. We typically associate a data type with a database table, so you have similar characteristics. Columns with data that's in them. Right. Move on. So you check yourself. So now we take a look at the data page definition. Now remember I said that every rule type has a rules form. On the rules form is where you configure the rule instance that you're about to create and save. So what are the steps again? When I get ready to accomplish something in Pega, I need to identify of the 200 plus rule types, which one I want to use. Once I identified it, then I create a new instance of it, and I can configure it on that rules form. And then after I configure it, then I save it, and then I can integrate it or implement it into my workflow wherever it's needed. So let's look at the data page definition. There's a structure, an object, a mode, and a scope. The structure says, how do you want the data to come back? Single row, list of information, that set of data. The data object, which data object do you want me to use to go and structure that data for you? And when the data comes back from the database and when I put it in memory, what do you want me to allow the mode to be? Can I edit it directly in my program? Should I make it read only so that I don't affect the integrity of the data? Or in our case, is it savable? You've looked at it, viewed it, and I've hit the enter button. Now I want to go and save it. And then the scope. The scope is what we will talk about. How long or in what manner do you want it to be persisted in memory? Okay. So let's take a look at some of these structures. Information, look at data objects, and we'll look at the edits, and we'll look at the scope. Okay, I want to leave it right there because those are pretty good definitions. But let me go over to the environment. In the environment, now notice that this data type has three data pages: customer for the lookup, list for the set of data to return, and savable to save that information that you're looking at. So let's take a look at the lookup. And we can identify that here is a data type, and this is a instance, because you'll see that this is the data type name, this is the label, And these are the availabilities, just like any and every rule that you see. Now, a data page does not belong to a class. Notice this. You don't see the class that it is applied to. You see the ID, but what's interesting, the label differs a bit from the ID because it is prefixed with D underscore. Every data page is prefixed with the D underscore. And then it has a rule set with the major, minimal, patch. So it is a rule, but it is a different type of rule because it's not applied to a class. It is because it is a declarative rule, it is owned by the system. So we don't save it in a particular class, it's owned by the system. But this is a rules form like all other rules because with that you see the different tabs for configuration. Okay. Now, the data type cannot be configured on App Studio. You will not find this definition or any portion of that in App Studio. You will have to go to Dev Studio. Now you can go to, I believe, the Integration Explorer. It will show you the relationships of data pages to case types and those relationships. But if you click on them, it will throw you into Dev Studio. So let's look at the major sections here. Data page definition, structure. What do I need it to be? Page or list. That's the only two options that you have. You want it page, bring back one row, list, bring back multiple rows. I'm talking about a database. What's my data object? Well, this is always, there is an exception when it's not, but it should always be a data dash class. Very, very rarely it would be a unique use case for it to be a work dash class. This is data dash. Then you have the mode. You have three modes. Read only. That means when I bring the data back and I have fetched it, stored it in my memory, how do you want me to set its security? Read only, which means that you can read it, move it around, but you cannot modify. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't copy it to some other location and modify it. But what I may want to make sure of, if it's read only, I want to bring it back. I have that data. And if I'm going from multiple screens, now the integrity of that data is saved for me. Or I can make it editable, which says when I bring the data back, I can modify that exact data that's in memory. I can do that. It makes it easier when I want to save it. Because now I've already updated it and I don't have to copy it to some other structure that's similar to my data type and then save it later on. But it all depends upon the structure and which one you should use. And then we talk about the scope. We have three different scopes. Now I have to define this for you. This will define typically if something is in cache, who actually has access to it. So let me go to load management before I talk about scope so that you know that scope, I have thread, requester, and node. Thread, requester, and node. Load management works in concert with it that says, here's a refresh strategy. Now, typically, I only want node and requester when I want to establish a refresh strategy. Again, the typical scenario is if I select node or requester, then I am needing to establish a refresh strategy. Typically don't have to do that if I'm going to use thread. And I'll tell you why later on. But here it gives me two options, and I can utilize both of these features or these configurations. I can create a when rule, and in my when rule, it will evaluate the when rule to be true. And it says, do not reload when my when rule is true. So maybe it might be that I say, do not reload this when it's Friday, when it's Saturday or Sunday. No one should be on the system. There's no use of utilizing system resources. And if someone happens to come in, runs a screen that calls this, well, I'll let them use the old data. Nothing has changed since Friday anyway. The second option is I can be more specific. Reload if older than. Now, they'll ask you these questions on the test. What are the two refresh strategies that you have? Do not reload when, and the other one is reload if older than. One is a when, do not when, reload if older than. Reload if older than, maybe I'll say for 2 days. So what does that mean? That means typically, if I go and fetch data on Monday, let's say Monday at 8 a.m., and I bring it back into cache, and if other people are getting into the application and going to portions of that application that utilizes that data page, they're going to use the same data for 2 days, according to my refresh strategy. After Tuesday at 8 a.m., yeah, Monday, Tuesday, so those are my 2 days. After Tuesday at 8 a.m., if someone else comes in, then it will reload because it is now past the reload if older than. And I can set it to hours, minutes, or seconds. Or I could fill in all three of those. Now, I tell you that because it tells me what? That it tells me that I can allow data that I retrieved to remain in cache for a duration or a period of time. Now, this works in concert with the scope. You typically want to have a refresh strategy with requester or and node. And I'll tell you why. When I look at node, I'm going to start at the bottom because it's easier. Remember our access group. Our access group indicates typically we're all in the same department. So basically what I'm saying is, let's say a group of accountants, they all log in and they are all using this one UI that happens to hit the same data page. And they're on the same node. Let's say, for instance, that they are in Mexico City. So there's a cluster of machines in Mexico City, and they're all on the same node there, physical node. And what that is really saying is any of those accounting team members that has requested that information based upon the refresh strategy will determine when they will get a fresh set of data. And another example, let's say that on the node, not only do I have accountants, but let's say that I have the marketing department, I have the consulting department, and they're all on the same node, and they all happen to use this particular screen to pull up information. Well, if they're all on the same node, and if my refresh strategy says, do not reload until 5 p.m., okay? Or maybe I'll just say one day, do not reload 1 day. Then what happens, everybody that comes in on Monday, after that first person comes in, after the first person on that node comes in, The system checks the cache. It's not loaded. It fetches the information, loads it in the cache. Now, if there's 1,000 people after that one person, or 999 people after that one person, and they come in, they're going to get the data for that day from the cache. That's what node means. So now it's making it available to certain people on a node, which is a series of machines that Pega is running on. Multiple physical machines, but it's viewed as one virtual node. Okay. So now, how does requester work? Because requester works with the cache also. The requester says this: if a user being a requester, I'm a user, any one of the accountants that's there in their department, let's just use the accounting team, and they have 3 case types that they work with: one for revenue, one for expenses, and one for taxes. And in the case life cycle on the workflow, they all use this one screen. All 3 of those cases will use this one screen that will call this data page. So what this means is, if I'm the requester and I'm in the case type to do revenue, it's going to say, hey, this is the first time in. The data's not in cache. I have to go and fetch it, bring it back, and I'll put it in cache, and we'll use the same refresh strategy, stay there for a whole day. Okay. Well, later on after lunch, I come in and I say, now I need to do an expense. I do some expenditures. I hit that UI. It calls my data page, goes out to look to say, oh, wait a minute. That information is already in cache, and it's within the time of my refresh cycle. So I'm not going to make another call to the database. I'm going to use what's in cache. So this is for one requester. Now let's say that same requester decides that he or she needs to do some tax processing. So they get into the tax case type, and it calls again that UI that points to that data page. That data page, it's still within the same workday. It looks and says, hey, there's already data there, and it will use the data. So that's how requester in Node is utilized with the refresh strategy that you find on the load management tab. Remember that. I'm trying to talk a lot about this because these are the types of questions that they will ask you. And let's take a look at scope. Scope is fairly simple when it comes to thread. That's our normal processing. So normally what that says in thread is I'm going to go and process the data, and I'm going to bring it back. Now, if I leave it at thread and say that is a UI dropdown, if I come back a second time to that dropdown, guess what it's going to do? It's going to go to the database, bring it back. What if I hit the dropdown a third time? It's going to go to the database, bring it back. Right? So there are reasons to use the different scopes. If, for instance, I need to make sure that my information is correct every time I click on it, I want to look at prices for the stock market, I want it to be thread. I definitely want it to be thread. I want the latest and greatest information. Right? If I'm wanting to, for instance, I want to check to see if the students have uploaded all their test scores. It was Friday, and Monday is when I need to verify that they're uploaded. Then I may set my scope to requester or thread and set my refresh strategy to 2 days, because I'm not really interested until Monday to see the update of what's actually there. That's a lot of information about a data page, but it's important. Remember, it is a rule type of data page. It is not applied to a class because it is a declarative rule. Everything else applies though. It has availability, it has an ID, it's prefixed with D underscore. It has a rule set with the major, minor, patch. It has rules form with different configuration features. And here, definition and load management are the primary ones. And then finally, we take a look at the data sources. What are the data sources? Well, this is saying I need to get my data from someplace. Where do I go and get my data? Well, that lookup, that's when I want to bring back a single value. And I want to use the lookup logic so that I can call the customer class and I can even pass parameters in. Remember, it builds a SQL, a SQL statement to do the retrieval. And so if I need to pass parameters, maybe it's a field off of one of the UI controls, I need to pass that in, then I can pass it into parameters. And by the way, I have to set the parameters here on the parameters tab. So it's much like a method. In traditional programming, now this really looks like a method or a function. You want to pass me parameters in so that I can use those local parameters or that local values to then execute something. And once it brings back the data, I can send it through a data transform. I know the way the data is coming back, but now I need to manipulate it with a data transform coming back, and I then can do that. That's why it's called the response data transform. Well, lookup is only one option that I have. I have multiple options. I can call a connector. Now, we've not talked in detail about a connector, but if I want to get access to a third-party data source like the credit score, they normally have what's called a service, and I have to have a connector with a key that's going to connect to that service. So I can create a connector, and I can have that connector type. It can be REST, SOAP, .NET, SAP, Java, JCA, HTTP, any of those, and I can utilize those protocols for a connector. Now, you won't have to memorize that. Not in this class. Just know that on the test, they may ask you the different types, the different sources. Know that you have a lookup, connector, data transform. Basically says, let's use some data that's already in memory in one of my data transforms. Or I can say a report definition. That's the default. Says build a query, go out to the database, bring back the information. I have something called an activity that's like low-level programming in Pega. We'll talk about that in the SSA class, but typically we won't use activities unless we have to, but they are a good source. And then I have robotic automation, robotic desktop, that's called, and then I have aggregation sources. So I have multiple ways that I can source data. The default comes up as report definition. But now, what happens if the data really doesn't exist? And I talk to the people responsible for the data and they say, it won't be ready for a couple of weeks. Well, I don't want to wait on that. So I can do something here. I can simulate my data source and I can point to a data transform. And then it runs just like it's going out to a real source, but it's just going to a data transform where I've dummied up some data. I said first name is Darryl, last name is Dunnington, age is you won't need to know the age, address is this, and so I can dummy that data up so that I can at least continue my development process. Okay. So that is the detailed coverage of a data page. The list will look the same, except for it has a list. This is read-only mode. You typically want the list to come back in read-only mode because you got multiple lines of information coming back. And then we have the savable. The savable is typically thread. You want to save that, make sure that it gets saved. You have additional options. You actually have conditional options too when you get ready to save the data. So when something is true, otherwise when something happens, so you know that if you are saving data, it may fail. So you may need to make sure that the return code that you're checking is valid. And that covers data page. That's a lot of information about data page. And that covers everything that they talk about here in these pages. Let me go to the next topic. I've already covered the data sources. So I want you to know that you don't have to read about that. Now, there's something that you use the query field type. Remember, we have reference field type, case type, query types. You want to use the query field type when data needs to be referenced from a data page. So that's the most common type that you would want to utilize. In the refresh strategy, we've covered that. Out-of-date data is also referred to as stale data, right? It's beyond those time periods that you had specified. So we can have ways to manage that in load management. Go in, and again, you see that thread requester, reload once per interaction. You may want those there. Do not reload when, use a when condition, reload if older than. So we've covered all of this information. Auto-populate, this was the feature that I was making reference to. We'll talk a bit more about this when we get to the UI, and you'll be able to see it. But when you auto-populate, then it's probably off of some action that you've done to a property or control in the UI, and that property is pointing to, is referencing a data page. Data page goes to the database, brings back the list, and you want to set that probably auto-populate, refer to the data page. Definitely, probably you don't want to use manual. Copy data from the data page. So you have those options. So just know that those options are available. SSA, we talk more in details about that. This particular skill set, you just have to know that you have the options to auto-populate or not. Okay. Oh, they give you an example of what I just mentioned for that UI. In the control, you want to see that information. You're specifying the data page. You're specifying the value that you want to pass to it. That would probably be the pass in. So that's working in concert with your UI and your data page, your UI control. And we talked about simulating a external data source. So there you go. That's just that simple checkbox that you put there for the data source, and then you can dummy up a data transform. All right, so that covers integration or data page. There's one more module that we want to look at. So they'll have you go through and simulate a external data source. This is very simple to do. That's why they tell you it only takes 10 minutes, because they'll have you go to the data page and have you do some other things. But at the end of the day, where's the data page? They'll have you go into the data page and just say that you're going to simulate at work. You're gonna, yeah, data page with simulation created successfully. Right. So that's a pretty simple exercise for you to do. May not even take you 10 minutes. Right, let's go to the next required module. So this is the last required module, and we've talked about this, but they created a separate module to talk about saving data. Remember, in that data page, one of the types of data pages is savable. Well, they just elaborate or talk a bit more about saving the data page. And they give you some information here about saving it. You can, when to use the when, otherwise when. Normally that's set there for you. But save type, I want to save the database. You give it the object that you want to utilize. If you need to do any data transformation, you can do that. And if you want to do any data validation, you can do that also. So it gives you everything that you need to do that will allow you to save a data page. And you do have an automation. Where that you can save a data page. Now, you don't have an automation for you to create it or to bring back a list or a page, but you do have an automation to save a data page. And they will allow you to go and put that information there. Then you get to the module quiz. And you have the save data to the system record, 10-minute exercise for you to do. And then that leaves you doing the mission exercise and the mission test. Okay, so it's the top of the hour for us. That covered everything that I wanted to cover. That leaves us for Wednesday. Yeah, let's see. So I'll start talking about some of these modules, get us back on track on Wednesday. And I will update the schedule because now the dates are off with where we are. As I mentioned before, we are actually on 24 here. That's where we're supposed to be, but we are almost 2 sessions behind. I'll make the adjustment, show you guys how to get through the material, but I do need you to complete the 3 modules by Friday. Get those done and we're on track. So get your mission for low code extended, data and integration, and remember that we have Thursday as a holiday. It's a US holiday. That's all I have for you. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I will see you Wednesday at 6:30. Have a wonderful evening.